Hey, how you doing? I don't normally record separate intros to my videos. I normally record the whole thing in one go so that there's consistency between them. But with this video, I've recorded this intro afterwards. The reason I've done that is because I recorded this video a couple of days ago. It's quite ranty, so you might enjoy it. But the reason I've recorded this intro separately instead of the one I originally did is because this morning in the post, this arrived. This, I honestly thought was going to be a reproduction. I paid a very small amount of money for it, and I've already got a copy of this book. Hang on, one moment. It's here. So I've now got 2 copies of this. This is a fantastic book on wrestling. I've made a couple of videos about it. My most successful ever video was on the guy that wrote this book. So I'm going to give this copy away if, and here's the thing, if this video, this rant video where I go on about the difference between a Kimura and a double wrist lock, and it is a little bit ranty, if I get to more than 10,000 views, I'm going to give this away. I haven't really decided how I'm going to pick who to give it to. It'll probably be to someone on my Patreon supporters list. But yeah, either way, somebody watching this video will get this if it gets to over 10,000. So fingers crossed, eh? And now sit back, strap yourself in, get the popcorn out, because I'm about to get ranty. It's not a fucking Kimura. On October the 23rd, 1951, in the Maracana Stadium in Rio de Janeiro, Masahiko Kimura fought against Helio Gracie and won. The technique he used was named in his honour and is still commonly referred to as a Kimura today. It all sounds very reasonable when you look at it like that, but I'd like to explain why it's actually a little insulting. The technique Kimura used is sometimes called Gyaku Urugarami, a reverse entangled arm lock, but this name is just as spurious as calling it a Kimura. The Kodokan recognises 9 specific arm locks, the closest of which is Udagarami, known in modern combat sports as the Americana. If you understand how an Americana works, it isn't a big stretch to bring the arm down instead of up. But there's a lot more to the technique than simply flipping an Americana. The mechanics of the submission are different. The body position is different. The way your weight is distributed to increase the action of the hold is different. And we know this because it's a common technique within catch wrestling. And it already has a name. It's a double wrist lock. Kazushi Sakuraba, who, despite being one of the greatest ever MMA fighters to walk into a ring or a cage, openly describes himself as a professional wrestler. He used the double wrist lock to defeat both Royler and Renzo Gracie. Sakuraba was taught by Billy Robinson, who in turn learned his art at the hands of Billy Riley and a few others in the infamous Riley's Gym in Wigan. But a double wrist lock is far more than just a submission finish. It's a grip. It utilises the principle of 2-on-1 that's common throughout grappling arts. You gain wrist control, then lock in the double wrist lock hold in order to fully control the arm. It's often used to break and reverse a standing chest to back hold, but once you have it secure, you can use it for a number of classic wrestling takedowns. Josh Barnett, who was also taught by Billy Robinson, uses it regularly. In his UFC Fight of the Night against Andrei Arlovski, he used a textbook double wristlock takedown to bring Arlovski to the ground and set up the finish. Now, Billy Robinson went on record as saying that Kimura was taught the technique in Japan by Karl Gotch, but in reality, I'm not convinced. The dates don't quite line up. We know the technique existed in some traditional jiu-jitsu systems, and we know it existed in wrestling. It's possible that Kimura picked it up from jiu-jitsu, but it's far more likely that it was something he encountered from wrestling, even if it wasn't directly from Karl Gotch himself. We know Kimura made his living partly as a judo instructor, but in the main as a professional wrestler. That's why he was in Brazil in the first place. He founded Kokusai Pro Wrestling and was part of the Japan Pro Wrestling Association. He competed against Rikidozan for the heavyweight title in a controversial match that was supposed to be scripted, but turned out to be a genuine shoot. We'll never know for certain where he picked up the technique, but the odds look to be in favour of wrestling being the source. Now, whether wrestling adopted the technique from jiu-jitsu in the first place is another question entirely, and the cross-pollination between catch and jiu-jitsu is definitely too big a topic for this video. So why is it insulting to name the technique after him? Well, two reasons. Firstly, Kimura is widely regarded as being perhaps the greatest judoka of all time. At the age of 18, he defeated 8 opponents, one after the other, at the Kodokan to be awarded his Godan, 5th degree black belt. Over his entire career, he's only said to have lost 4 bouts. When he fought Helio Gracie, a fantastically skilled and experienced fighter in his own right, he absolutely dominated the fight. He threw him repeatedly, he pinned him with numerous holds, and only when none of those caused Gracie to submit did he resort to the double wrist lock, which he used to break Gracie's arm and get the win. Ignoring the vast amount of skill, technical ability and sheer dominance of the man, and pinning his victory on one specific hold, is simply a way to dismiss the fact that Kimura was in fact the better fighter, by some margin. Dismissing the legacy of one of the greatest fighters of all time as someone who was good at a single hold only serves to protect Gracie's name and reputation. There's no shame in being second best to Masahiko Kimura. But the thing the Gracie family have always been best at is marketing. And so Helio walked away from the loss, his reputation pretty much intact. Which leads on nicely to the second reason. I need to stress at this point that I am not in any way trying to dismiss what Helio Gracie and the rest of his family have done for the grappling arts. They have literally changed the way the world thinks of ground fighting and created a whole generation of fighters with ability far ahead of anything they could have had otherwise. Their legacy is immense. But they did this, at least in part, by running down other fighters, dismissing entire systems of combat as being worthless, and at the same time lifting technique wholesale into the canon of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. Calling a double wrist lock a Kimura allowed them to take the technique, make it a standard part of what they did, and still not admit that wrestling had anything of value to offer the world of grappling. When Sakuraba beat Henzo, he was acclaimed as the Japanese version of the Gracies. That may have been meant as a compliment, but it was exactly the same as the family did with Masahiko Kimura. It took a loss against a skilled opponent from a different branch of grappling and framed it as a Gracie thing. Sakuraba won because he was actually a Gracie. Kimura won because he was slightly better at a specific technique than Helio. Gracie Jiu-Jitsu won because it was by far the best art. So when you call a double wrist lock a Kimura, you aren't celebrating the man who used it so effectively. You're dismissing the incredible level of skill he had as a truly well-rounded grappler. And as if that wasn't enough, you're dismissing an entire system of grappling that has proved itself time and time again to be the equal of any. It's a double wrist lock.